You good?
Yeah.
Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwookdub.
This is Merps. All right, we are getting 1 week closer to the expansion, to the Rumble, and that's all I have to report.
There-
That's it.
There's there's
Nothing.
no such thing as Rastakhan. I don't know what's gonna happen in a few weeks from now. But I do know that there are still like 3.5 weeks of this meta left. Like, we talk as if this meta is already over and done with, but it is not over and done with. It's not even like the same meta that we had before Hallows Eve. So if you don't remember, because you just got back after a 1 year break in Hearthstone, or you are like me and just have a terrible memory, we had a Hallows Eve event on Halloween with dual classes for 2 weeks, and then we got kind of like put back into our quote unquote the old meta, but with plenty of adjustments. Like the nerfing of giggling, right, is huge, and they rebucketed, which is also pretty huge. And apparently they micro adjusted, and we'll talk about that. So actually, a lot of things changed. But as soon as they changed, the day after that, on BlizzCon, Rastakhan was announced, and so no one really talked about anything else besides what's actually going to happen at Rastakhan. And we're gonna fix that, and that includes us because we got Collins on here. We talked about a lot of stuff. It was a great episode. If you missed last week's episode for whatever reason, it's 2 hours long. Go listen to it. I think it's one of our best episodes of the year. Because it's Collins and he's great, and we reviewed the Rastakhan cards, and it's great.
Make sure you have 2 hours to spare for it.
Oh no, it was long, but it was entertaining and long. It's not just us boringly going along our day. It's us plus Collins, which makes it a lot more exciting. But yeah, now we're back to just us, and we're gonna go back to being really, really boring. And we're gonna talk about the next week and a half slash the previous weeks, not even a whole week, previous like half weeks worth of meta. And I'm gonna call it the November meta, just because I have no real way to describe it. And I am going to assume it's not going to drastically change. They sometimes change it with a patch like a few days before the next expansion comes out. But basically, until the next expansion comes out or around thereabouts, so until like December 4th, right? Maybe like November 30th if Blizzard wants to make some kind of overall change like they did with Boomsday on the offering rates. But we're going to have this for 3 weeks. I'm calling it the November meta. So, Merps, the November meta. What do we know about the November meta?
Well, we know it's been good. It's been good for us, and it's been good for a couple of other streamers as well. We've been getting some pretty good averages, pretty high wins. And Collins dropped by the stream on Friday, and we were just sharing some stories, and he was kind of telling me about his successes. And I was asking him, I was like, well, you're doing well, I'm doing well, even Advocta's doing well. So what about other streamers? And he was saying that like it seems like a lot of arena regulars are doing quite well, which sort of begs the question, why, right? What changed? But yeah, like he was reporting that he had like lots of 12s, and I was just coming off back to back to back 12s as well. So, did the meta get softer? Is everyone hiring win traders now?
Come on, we started
talk
that.
about
People
what's going
can't
on.
copy us.
Well, they could. We don't charge a lot, or we don't give them a lot of money. So there you go.
Yes, we charge our win traders for the privilege of trading us.
Yeah,
That's how you got it. That's how you got to work it. Okay, so yeah, meta's been soft. It's been strangely like normally you think that in an event the meta is softest, right? So when Dual Class Arena came, we told you, other people told you, like it's gonna be a soft meta for a bit, and it was. What was really surprising is that after the Dual Class Arena ended, the meta got even softer rather than getting harder like it should. And I think that speaks to two things that have happened. The first major mover is that the Dual Class Arena was a success. And so even after Dual Class Arenas, people stuck around, right? People who don't usually play Arena, people who are worse than your average Arena players, they stuck around. So that's good. Also, the hype for Rastakhan, whatever they may have reminded people that, oh, Hearthstone exists. Maybe I'll get back and see what's happening here. But either way, the pool seems a little softer than it was before. And the other big mover is that things changed. And whenever you make things in the arena better, more even, more skillful, the people who are going to react fastest to it and the people who are already built to do better in that kind of environment are generally your good players, your top players, and they're just going to do even better. So we know things have changed sometime between like right before the Hallows Eve and when the November meta started. We've said it before, the big one being Giggling Inventor being out, and it's kind of a new meta anyway. But there's also two other changes that have happened. One is that there's been some kind of rebucketing. So it's not like the major rebucking that we had last time, and in fact, part of it may be part of the rebucketing that we talked about a few weeks ago before the Hallows Eve event, where we were like, why is Giggling not moved? And then we found out why Giggling wasn't moved. But we didn't have like arena when we were looking at buckets, we really just like, say, hi ZD man from Arena Drafts. What do the buckets look like? Like, we're not doing a lot of work here. And then we look at the list and we kind of analyze it, and then it goes into the Lightforge tier list. So the Lightforge tier list on the lightforge.com, our tier list, is always up to date with what we think, what we know as the most up to date meta. But in cases where Arena Draft doesn't have enough data, like for example, a epic class only spell, like Dino Size, we're pretty sure, and Taro pointed this out as soon as we said we updated the buckets. Taro was like, wait, Dino Size isn't updated. I know Dino Size moved. And we're like, yeah, like maybe it did move. We just didn't have enough data, or like Arena Drafts didn't have enough data. So Taro went out and fixed all of that. So we don't know if this new round of changes actually happened. We know some of them happened afterwards and were actually legitimate new changes, and some of them are just ones that we didn't have enough data to get correctly, or Arena Drafts did it. So Taro worked with ZD Man and Jarkin Hawk to kind of make better use of the statistics that Arena Drafts had, and so if you look at the Lightforge.com, things like the tier lists have been updated again, and that. I guess I'll go over it right now. It's just everything got moved like half a bucket. Like a lot of changes actually happened compared to where we thought things were, but it's all half a bucket. The only 3 cards that moved one whole bucket that are not legendary is, like I said before, Dino Size. That moved down. It used to be 1 top, which meant it was unpickable, and now it's 2 top, which means you should probably not pick it. But it's okay now, right?
When you say 1 top and 2, so top of the first bucket, because like it makes sense to you. Let's use the terms that we've always been using, right? Like top of the first bucket instead of just 1 top.
Wait. So what should I say? Top half.
Top of the top half of the first bucket instead of 1 top.
Okay, top half of the first bucket. Dino Size going down to the top half of the second bucket. So we've always had. I mean, we haven't always had, but for a while now, Dino Size has been rated I want to say like 120, 118, which still makes it at the bottom of the top half of the second bucket. But it's now more pickable than if it was even 1 bucket even higher, right? So this goes with normal Blizzard things, where they probably realized Dino Size no one was picking it, and they didn't want to move it more than 1 bucket. We saw this before when we were going over the neutral changes like a month ago. So that's one of the changes. Another change is Voltaic Burst got moved from the bottom of the second bucket to the bottom of the third bucket. Voltaic Burst, if you don't know, is the card that actually, I mean, you should get familiar with it, because it's the one that's 1 mana overload 1 and summon 2 1/1 rush creatures, right? And we're getting a new card in Rastakhan that's going to be similar. That'll be a 1 mana 1/1 rush that adds a 1 mana 1/1 rush to your hand. So this is clearly a worse card because you got to do it all at once. But still, it's not a bad card. And we have it rated these things are also elemental, so that helps a little. But we have it rated a 92, which made it for the like really terrible for the second bucket. And we don't know why they started it in the second bucket. But these are cards that Blizzard should be rebucketing immediately, and it just hasn't been rebucketed. So they've now moved it down 1 whole bucket to the bottom of the third bucket. It's still basically unpickable. Like it's still that bad. Um, for Voltaic Burst, so I don't think it makes much of a difference, but just know that it's in a slightly more appropriate bucket now. Like this is a card that should be in like the 6th bucket or the 7th bucket. But yeah. And finally, this one may actually matter. Duskhaven Hunter got moved from the bottom of the 5th bucket to the bottom of the 6th bucket.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of random because it's not really a new card. It's a Witchwood card. But yeah, Duskhaven Hunter. It is the 3-mana 2/5 stealth that
could become a
switches.
5/2.
Yeah, it switches to a 5/2 or 2/5 depending on what turn you play it. And it used to be a pretty good pick. I remember I picked it a lot whenever I'm Hunter, and now it's less good of a pick because it got moved up, and it's now in the 4th bucket. It's still definitely pickable. I think it's I mean, I don't know. Well, you play Hunter more than I do. I think it was probably right on the bottom of the 5th bucket. I don't really know why that got moved.
So it got moved to the 4th?
Yeah, to the bottom of the 4th from the bottom of the 5th. So it was next to stuff like Seaflorium Bomber, Kaboom Bot, the new Giggling Inventor. Now it's around like Wild Pyro and War Gear and like Omega Defender.
Yeah, I think it's still pickable, but right, it's weird that they're like that card kind of got moved, right? It's kind of an unspectacular card that is very helpful, and I found lethal with it quite a few times with like a stealth 5/2. But yeah, it's a card in which I was like, I don't know why you're moving that instead of like some other cards.
Yeah,
other cards that are probably higher priority.
Yeah, so a bunch of stuff got moved as well, like half a bucket that we're not even going to go over. Because half bucket changes, like if you move from like 4 top to 4 bottom, it's not that big of a deal. At the very top, like the top cards, it may be a little important in how you play around stuff. So I'll mention a couple of them. Blink Fox got moved up half a bucket. Sap got moved down half a bucket. So you're going to see more Saps now. I don't know why Sap got moved back. I'm guessing people just don't know how to play Sap. Or are afraid to play it or something, or like to pick it, because Sap is insane. Sap should be definitely top of the top bucket no matter what. Yeah, and that's kind of it for like the top, for movements in and out of the top bucket. So those are bucket changes, and that is another thing that's actually changed. And finally, what's changed is micro adjusts.
Yeah. So micro adjust, as you guys probably know, not only do we have the cards put into groups or buckets, but cards are also micro adjusted. Sometimes it's not so micro, but you could see cards being offered more or being offered less. And this is just really Blizzard kind of putting their thumb on the scale and saying, we want people to see more of this card. We don't want people seeing this card as much. So these micro adjusts can have a huge, impact on how good a class is. And we seem to have had a micro adjust recently. Tachi Derp, Infinite player, leaderboard player, posted this on Arena HS 4 days ago, and he just went through the HS replay data and saw that within a period of like 1 to 2 days, essentially Warlock and Druid fell a decent amount, and Hunter and Paladin rose by a decent amount. And by a decent amount, it's like more than 1%, which is very significant.
Yeah.
Like in that short amount of time, it's like something has to have changed to for that amount. And also he saw some evidence of cards becoming significantly more or less popular. And these are cards that are kind of like, it's not something that someone figured out, right? These are cards like Dread Infernal, like Omega Agent, Ultimate Infestation, Savannah Highmane, Spike Ridge Steed. These are cards that which like people know, they're a known entity. Like people take them, they're good cards. And it's like I said, there's nothing more to figure out with these cards. And if you see huge shifts with these sorts of cards, it probably means that there have been micro adjustments.
So it's not like, just so people are using HS replay data, this. It's not exactly like a one-to-one thing, because HS replay data presents their like they present their data in a really freaking weird way for Arena. I don't know if it's more useful for constructed this way, but they just look at the whole pool of all classes and tell you how much they see in a deck. Um, so you're offering rates of certain things. It could be like, especially like a lot of the things could be impacted by just like people picking a particular card more often. I'm sorry, people picking a particular class more often. But I have gone back and checked like these things and what Tachi Derp was suspecting, and I think he's right. There are like the movements are too big to just be people are playing this class more often, and when you isolate for a particular class, some of these cards in particular buckets just like all move up. Like all the cards in the bucket move up in offering rate. And when something like that happens, you're like, okay, so now this bucket is just getting offered more than it used to be, and this bucket is sometimes a high bucket. Like hunters have some high buckets, and paladins have some high buckets moved up a bit. No, one of the things with paladin is silver sword moved up half a bucket, so it's now in the top of the second bucket now, which again we think is a top card, but it's at least getting closer, right? Like Blizzard had it forever in the third bucket for no good reason. Okay. So, generally speaking, Hunter and Paladin got micro adjusted up a bit, and Druid and Warlock got micro adjusted down a bit. If you play Druid now, you'll realize you get a ton of Savage Roars. If you played Druid 2 months ago, you realize you got like 4 per draft on average, or something ridiculous like that offered to you. So, a lot of these micro adjusts are not like game-changingly huge, but it does adjust the numbers a bit. And if you look at the win rates for HS Replay, it mattered, but it's not like we're at even win rates right now. And it has one giant gap that I don't know if they did that on purpose or not, but Warrior was always the number 1 class in Boomsday. And Warriors were not touched, no matter which way you look at it.
Yeah. So Warrior is still number 1. They didn't touch Warrior, they didn't touch Rogue for whatever reason. But if you're talking about big winners, definitely, Hunter and Paladin, they were just terrible. So bad. I drafted a lot of Hunters before the micro adjust, and it was fine. You can definitely win some, but you hit a hard wall, and your car. It's just because your car quality was so terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now, it's just anecdotal evidence, but I've drafted like 3 Hunters after the micro adjust, and it's felt so much smoother because with Hunter, you don't need a ton of good cards. If your deck quality, as the Hunter, if you're playing like aggro or even sort of like mid-rangey, if it's just a little bit better, that helps so much. It's like with Hunter, it's a game of inches, right? So any extra sort of like little bit of advantage that you can get is really helpful. And Warlocks, yeah, I mean, that hurts a lot because part of what made them so good was their initiative, right? Initiative and AoEs and spells. And that's a lot of it is just good cards, right? Like if they have a little bit less chance to get that Defile, a little bit less chance to get the Dreadlord, right? Then they're missing like some pretty powerful tools there. So this kind of makes me happy, right? Hunter goes up a little, Warhawk goes down a little. Warrior stays the same. I don't mind it so much because like before the micro adjust, I found Warlocks a lot more annoying than Warriors because even though they have powerful stuff, they were a little bit less flexible in terms of like all of their removal than Warriors. So I'm okay with this because the power of Warlock versus the power of Warrior, as an infinite player, I found Warlocks a lot harder to play against than Warriors because Warriors have good tools, but I can set myself up to be a little bit more resilient to them.
Yeah. I mean, even now, right? People don't play against Warriors, right? And people have not had a lot of experience playing against Warriors, and Warriors just kind of changed fairly recently in terms of the style that they play. So I think a lot of people are still actually adjusting to it instead of just playing them again, like playing against them like they're playing against a normal class, in which case you get wrecked. It kind of bothers me that they're not consistent with it, though. they're like actually playing favorites because we know the win rates. Um, I guess we also know the pick rates, and warriors are still not being picked a lot because people are not comfortable playing them. So maybe that's one of the reasons. Maybe Blizzard's looking at more than just win rates, but also pick rates. But if they're also looking at pick rates, why are they knocking down Druid? Druid always has really terrible pick rates, no matter how good you make them in the arena, because a lot of people go to arena to escape constructed. So why would they pick Druid? And also, Druid is, for whatever reason, just like not very sexy in the arena, and it's always had low pick rates and lower win rates for average players, and that's what makes up the bulk of Blizzard's data. So I think that's probably like a reason for the micro adjust, but it's also kind of, and we know that Blizzard's using this for buckets, right? They've already told us they're using pick rates for buckets, not necessarily win rates. And it seems like from this that they're also using pick rates for micro adjusts, and that's not good because that's not balanced, right? If you have a class that people just don't like to use and they're like only 2% of the entire pool, but they're like way better than other classes and everybody has a higher win rate for them, you don't want your 12 wins to all be against this class. You don't want every good player to be forced to pick that class. You're still in the same problem. Like, you haven't solved the fundamental problem that creates a fair game. You've maybe incentivized people to play all classes more evenly as a whole group, right? So you'll see more of a particular class. But that kind of diversity is not balanced. It's just diversity. It's still imbalanced. But yeah, that's like the big overview picture of stuff that's changed. We're about to go like drill deeper now into what you're actually seeing in this meta. And we're going to use some HS replay data to talk about cards you need to play around. HS replay collects data from people who are generally good, so like around 4.5 wins per run, I think, maybe 4 wins per run. Basically, they're the bulk of the people you face, right? If you're on your way to like 8 wins, 9 wins, this data set is going to be pretty representative. If you're going in there, and there are some selection patterns, and we know that Blizzard doesn't offer 2 similar cards at the same rate because of bucketing and weird reasons, right? Blizzard's been doing this for a while, so you may think Blizzard is a rare spell. Also, another rare mage spell is, I don't know, I'm having trouble thinking of a rare mage spell. But Blizzard will be offered more than the other one, because Blizzard has just offered more. There's no good reason for it. That's just a thing. And Blizzard hasn't fully fixed that. So, okay, like Astral Rift, right? Like Astral Rift.
Yeah.
You're going to be offered more Blizzards than Astral Rifts. If you're like, what was Astral Rift again? That's why. Because you're still offered Blizzards more than Astral Rifts. No one's going to be like, I haven't seen a Blizzard in forever. But they will say, I haven't seen an Astral Rift in forever. Okay. I think overall, like, to end the overall note before we drill down deeper, it's a good meta to play in right now. Like, it's better than it was before. Giggling's gone. They just readjusted the buckets for the better. It's still not perfect or even close to it, but it got better. Micro adjust got better. It was pretty terrible before, and now it's... I still don't think it's good, but it is undeniably better. And, like, at least I thought this was the best meta at the start of Boomsday. So it just got better. Like, this is the time to play. You don't know if Blizzard's going to mess up the meta when Rastakhan comes out. And like we said before, it's also a pretty easy meta relative to other metas. There's still dual class arena players that are still players who are new to the arena that are still hanging around, and all the streamers and the good players are having success with it. We've all gotten a good number of high win runs. Our averages are super high during this period. I think we took Merp's and my average and like added it together for the period that happened after dual class ended. It's like over 10 easily, and we're not just like playing the good classes.
When did it happen?
For us, the first run that we played afterwards was Thursday. Me on last Thursday. So did you do Friday? You did Saturday.
Oh, like
you did
on
Saturday.
The first.
Yeah.
On Saturday. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's really high.
Yeah. And if you want to check out some of that, there's 2 runs already from that period on our YouTube. And there will be one more releasing every like 3 days because we're just piling on these 12-1 runs. So definitely check that out as well. But okay, drilling deep. The November meta, first class. Let's say you are facing a druid. And I'm going by just going down the list of percent seen in deck. So I know a lot of people think like, oh, they're playing a druid, therefore they must have a savage roar. Like I get that comment so often in chat, and I don't know if they play scared like this or if they're just like poking at me and being like, haha, this is gonna happen, you're gonna lose. But it seems like a prevailing theory that I think people know is wrong, but they fall back to it, which is that if my opponent can have a particular card, they probably do. Or like if it's a high enough win, they probably do. And here are some hard numbers from HS Replay, which is 4.5 win players, and the type of decks they run. Savage Roar is seen in 40% of all Druid decks. So my rule of thumb is if it's seen in X% of decks, the chances you're actually going to see it in the game is about half. And the chances you're going to see it in the game at the right time is about a third to a quarter of that. So this is about like 15%, 12% chance you're actually going to get Savage Roared in a bad way. That's not like game is ending anyway, Savage Roar. That's pretty low. 12 to 15%. And this is at 40% of in-deck rate. And I'll tell you that this is about the highest for almost all the classes. It hovers around somewhere between 40 to 45% chance that your opponent will have at least one copy of this card in their deck. That's it. That means it hovers around like 15% of whether your opponent will have this card when they need it. So, I think more than most players, I don't play around stuff. And it's because of this. It's because your read on something or like your security or whatever has to be so high that a 15% chance to get screwed is worth playing around. As opposed to just like getting an extra tempo on the board. That's like always useful. And that just, it rarely lines up like that. Like you have to be either so ahead or have such a solid read on your opponent for these considerations to really enter play. But for those times that they do enter play, and for your peace of mind, Savage Roar and Starfire, and also Starfall and Power of the Wild. That ranges from 40% to 35% of decks. And it really falls off after that for Druid. Yeah, so Power of the Wild and Savage Roar supports the same kind of archetype, which is like buff everything. So if you're afraid of your opponent actually buffing everything on the board, not to like deal lethal, but like just to like do trades on the board and stuff, well, then it's adding up, right? Now you have 40% plus 35%, that's 75%. So now there's like a good like 1/3 chance that you're gonna get screwed at the appropriate moment, right? That starts being a little bit more worth playing around.
Right.
In the same way, if you have something with like 5 damage, Starfire plus Starfall plus Ultimate Infestation later, like okay, now you know like putting something with exactly 5 health on the board is pretty bad against Druid and still is pretty bad against Druid. But if you're just looking for something like Starfall, right, dealing 2 damage to kill everything, they probably don't have it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's certainly kind of what I've experienced as well in terms of kind of like whenever I play against other classes, their lack of responses, and by classes, it's not like everyone. It's kind of like lack of responses from like warlocks, especially, right? Their lack of initiative, I've been very, very happy about. And it's something that I've just been like kind of surprised at because I played a portion of my runs before I sort of like knew this happened. And I was like, all right, time to go all in now against this warlock.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a turn in which I'm like, all right, if they have it, they have it. And then they started not having it to like a pretty high degree. I was like, huh, okay. That's weird. I guess I'm getting lucky. And now I'm just like, oh, that makes a ton of sense, right?
They just don't have it. Blizzard's just not giving it to them.
Right.
Yeah.
So it just feels good because like all these sort of like It really is Warlock that was my personal boogeyman. I don't know about you. And whenever I get beat by a warrior, it's sure there's all of these turns in which they just like there was really nothing you could do. Or they just got the warpath at the perfect time. But I find them like so much easier to handle than warlocks. And I don't know if I can contribute like all of my wins and my recent success to just being like, oh, warlocks are a little bit worse. That's why I'm suddenly getting like
Oh,
all these
screw
buffs.
it.
But yeah,
Right
it
into
it
stuff.
certainly helps.
Yep. Speaking of warlocks, we'll do warlocks next. Basically everything. So warlocks, you got a lot of double-sided board clears, and if you're just generally afraid of double-sided board clears, obviously play around them because there's so many cards, they add up. But in particular, the weird thing to play around has always been Defile, right? And Defile is seen in 45% of decks, and it is going down because the data set I'm looking at, it's the data set I'm looking at is the last 2 weeks. So it includes stuff that happens before when we think the micro adjust happened, which is when Hollow's Eve ended. So it's probably not going to be as bad anymore, but it's been going down. It's at 44% right now for the last 2 weeks. But I imagine it's probably more like 40% these days, or even 35%. And in either case, just like don't be too afraid of it. Right? Like even at 45%, that's like a less than 20, definitely less than 20% chance that it'll be available to your opponent on the turn they need it. Even though they do get to see an extra card, right? If they desperately need it. So there's that. And if you're thinking like, oh, but what about like Hellfire? Hellfire is only 33%. Dread Inferno is only 33%. Like it all adds up if you just can't take like any kind of board clear. But for any specific one, don't be too worried about it, even for Warlock. And Warlock's kind of extreme, right? The class that's really interesting when it comes to the playing around, and I do this a lot. I don't know how often other people do it, but it's when you're facing Shaman. Hex is seen 50% of times. Lightning Storm is seen 46% of the time. These are insanely large numbers because, as we all know, Shaman's got really good micro adjusts, right? You just get those top bucket cards a lot. And that's why Hex and Lightning Storms are appearing so often, because people think they're the best cards, and they pick these cards a lot. Stormforge Axe, 40% of the time. And I don't see my opponents play Stormforge Axe a lot. But yeah, so those are your big cards. But those cards don't have duplicate functions as much as some of these other classes do. Like, Crushing Hand is similar to Hex, but Crushing Hand is only taken 30% of the time, even though it's probably offered as much as Hex. Volcano, people really don't want to take Volcano. Lightning Storm is taken all the time, 46%, but Volcano is only taken 24% of the time. That means it's going to be so rare for you to get Volcanoed. Like, you'll remember it, because a good Volcano is insane, but it's just not a card to play around. Like, if you're considering playing around Volcano or not, don't play around it too much. And if you're like even a little bit unsure of your victory, just don't play around it at all and push. Unless your opponent did something that gives you a read, right? If your opponent's like, I'm not going to do anything for one more turn, you're like, all right, maybe Volcano. But I feel like I've seen cases in which my opponent could have been baiting Volcano and could have just like legit not had of anything, or like maybe wishing they were going to top deck a Volcano and then it not happening much more often than I see them actually have the Volcano. And these numbers kind of back up why. This is just not a Volcano meta. People aren't picking it. Or maybe it's not getting offered enough.
I sure never pick it.
We all know Merps's method of playing Shaman, which is Bloodlust on the board, definitely no Volcano, right? And a lot of other Shaman players may have picked up on that as well, right? Bloodlust is very popular. Bloodlust is 37%. That's pretty popular. But again, same as Savage Roar. And for Shaman, you don't have like a replacement for Bloodlust. Unlike Savage Roar and Power of the Wild. So your chances of getting Bloodlusted to death, very low. Okay. Let's look very quickly, Paladin. Paladin has probably, I don't know if people have noticed this, but I certainly haven't, and I will play around this card more now that I know about it. I don't even know how specifically to, because it's such a flexible card. But the most picked card in Paladin, the most seen card, is actually Sound the Bells.
That kind of makes sense. I mean,
It's 48%. The next highest one's Hammer of Wrath at 43%.
yeah, I see that, but I mean, it kind of makes sense because wait, what bucket is Sound the Bells in?
Sound the Bells is underbucketed.
Right.
It's always been underbucketed. It is in the fourth bucket, top of the fourth bucket.
Yeah, yeah. So it's in a bucket in which people look at it and they're just like, oh, this is one of my win conditions, right? And this is something that helps me stay on the board. And yeah, like whenever I see Sound the Bells, it's always very competitive, right? Like even against the best cards. Like if you're looking at a Potion of Heroism, if you're looking at equality, stuff like that, sometimes it's Sound the Bells instead of like those cards, which are at the very top of the bucket.
Yeah.
So I'm not that surprised.
Okay. I mean, the win rates on this card is not terribly high. But I can see why people like it, right? Because you're a paladin and you
Yeah.
want to buff stuff, and there's not a lot of cards these days that buff stuff, and they're expensive. Like they're very high bucketed. So you may be like, oh, I just need to buff more stuff on my deck. I have a good setup, and so I take Sound the Bells. But it's definitely something to watch out for, like whether your deck can get screwed, or like what you have on the board if it can get screwed by Sound the Bells or not, if you haven't tested for it before. Again, the same as Savage Roar and stuff. Don't go too out of your way for it, but keep it in mind. I definitely would not have guessed Sound the Bell as the by far number one card. If you're thinking about Silver Sword, it's 36%. That is it's well within your normal always pick when it gets offered to you kind of range, right? So you're still always picking the Silver Sword when it gets offered to you, but that's only like 36% of the time. And also very quickly, Mage has like nothing. Like Mage falls off a cliff after Blizzard at 35%.
That's weird.
Flame Strike is only 30%. That's not to say people like Blizzard's more than Flame Strike. Mage's offering rates are just really messed up. And they have such a high micro adjust against them that you just don't see their class cards in general. So definitely don't worry about Mage when it comes to any specific card. Unless it's like a very what do you call it? Like, what do you call it when you kind of like show what you want to do next? I'm blanking on the word.
What?
Like you're tipping your hand, like you very much like you've shown what you're going to do next. There's a word for it.
There is
Telegraph. Thank you, this impetus in chat. Very telegraphed play.
a tell. No, it's
No help.
not a
Nerds.
tell.
It's
Like,
telegraphed. It's a
yeah,
telegraph play.
yeah, that's what he wants.
So unless there is a telegraph play, you don't think about that. If you're looking for Pyroblast, it's 20% of decks have a Pyroblast. To be fair, if they have a Pyroblast, they're probably gonna get it like before, like in like 2/3 of games eventually, because it's a finisher. So its appropriate time is always any time before this opponent loses, right? So you're gonna get it 2/3 of the time, but that still averages out to something like what, like 12% of the time you're gonna get pyroblasted to death. 12% of all your mage matches. Like, don't think too much about it. You see me playing into pyroblast all the time, and people are like pyroblast, and I'm like, yeah, but odds are with me, right? I'll roll low now and then, right, and they'll actually have a pyroblast, but if it gets me the win, in a ratio that's better than that, then I'll take it. Hunters, no card really anchors the hunter, and if you're a hunter player, you know that. Your decks are pretty flexible, relying on a lot of neutral cards. The top card is, interestingly, Hunter's Mark at 46%, which is really high, and it's only rising. No
I
other
take it a
card
lot.
no other card breaks
Yeah.
30%.
That's pretty crazy. Yeah. But I take it an extremely high percentage of time. Also, just because huge taunts, like people, I think it's a counter pick, right? Because people are recognizing the fact that cards which might have been, and obviously there were some people that's like, oh, I thought they were always good, that might have just been considered okay-ish, are being more and more recognized as really good now. And two cards in particular, neutral, Furious Etin and class Tar Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those two cards people have recognized. They're like, whenever you drop it, you have a pretty high expectation that it'll stick, right? Or they have to like trade a lot of stuff into it very honestly. So those two cards I have seen a lot more, and people have slammed them down with a lot more confidence. And whenever I play Warrior and I have a Tar Lord, I'm just like, oh yeah, they have to trade into this, right?
Yep.
So something like Hunter's Mark, it's just it busts expectations, and also they're spending 7 mana for something. You spend 1 mana, you have 6 mana advantage to develop whatever you want to develop. You win the game off of that. So yeah,
I'm gonna
Hunter's Mark is something I heavily prioritize.
I'm gonna go even more basic than that. It's heavily misbucketed. It's the most misbucketed cards that's good for all playstyles for Hunter that exists right now. It's in the bottom of the 5th bucket. Like nothing else is that misbucketed that supports all playstyles, right? You have Cybertech Chip that we think is even more misbucketed, but it's only for it's for most playstyles really, but it's not something people are comfortable using, so they're not going to pick it, right? And a lot of people disagree with us on how good it is. Gladiator's Longbow, which is generally useful, but really much better if you're actually trying to play the board rather than or just go for lethal. There's playstyles in Hunter where you don't really want not you don't want a Gladiator's Longbow, but it's not as insane. Plus, it's in the 3rd bucket. And Vile Brood also falls into that category where it's a hard removal. People don't really value hard removals the same way. But I could that's I think the more basic reason why you see it so much is in the bottom of the 5th bucket. It's so obviously the best card. Okay. Let's go to Rogue. It's going to look a lot like Mage in Rogue because, it's heavily micro-adjusted down. So Betrayal and Phantom Knives are the two cards that hit around 39% of the time. Hallucination is 35% of the time. People trying to get Death Knights. And Elven Mistral already drops down to 33%. And there's just not that much to play around. How much do you play around a Phantom Knives, right? It's the only thing in Rogue that does that. How much do you play around a Betrayal? It's the only thing in Rogue that does that. So don't play around them too much unless you have a ridiculously secure board. And for Rogue, it's usually the more you extend your advantage, the better of a position you're in. It's a very straightforward kind of matchup. So especially in the mid game, I wouldn't let Phantom Knives or Betrayal worry you. If you have the option to play around them or not play around them, go for it. But if you're going to lose some tempo by not playing around them, then by playing around them. If you're going to lose tempo by playing around them, then don't play around them.
Yeah, this is something in which I think people focus on too much. It's yes, Betrayal and Phantom Knives are the most common ones, but on average, you should be more worried about, if 3 to 4 damage kind of screws you over, you should be worried about the collective sort of offering rate or
No.
percentage that you'll find Perdition's Blade, Crazed Chemist, Cold Blood, Chief Shot, Shadow Blade, all of this stuff, right? If you're just oh man, I hope Rogue doesn't have 3 to 4 damage. Rogue probably has 3 to 4 damage. So you're a lot more worried about stuff like that than these one-offs, which you'll see it, but sometimes you can take that chance and just be like, well, it's not like they have tons of this stuff.
All right, for Priest, there's Holy Nova at 46% and Spiralash at 39%. So if you're thinking that Priest can't deal the small amount of damage that board clears you, they actually probably can. It's not exactly the newest development, but it's something that I think people sometimes underestimate. So keeping things a little healthier will pay some dividends here. Shadow Word Pain is 38%. Power Word Shield is 40%. Priests have a lot of pretty high concentration of these cards, but there's nothing you can really do to play around Power Word Shield and Shadow Word Pain, only sort of. But just know that they're there. What I was surprised about is that Shadow Word Pain is beating out Shadow Word Death in pick rates. So if you're worried about playing around one of them, actually maybe play around Pain instead of Death. Unless you're at 10 mana, in which case Death plus Mind Control is obviously going to be more than just Pain. Mm. And for if you're wondering about Shadow Madness, it's at 32%. Barely worth considering, but if you set it up, you could lose the entire game. So try not to set up a game losing one. Don't try to play around it just if it's gonna get if it's gonna take 6 or 8 stats off of you, right? Let it. don't worry about it if they're taking a 3-3 and running it into your 4-3. Worry about it if they're also getting some ridiculous death rattles out of it.
Yep.
And that's everything besides Warrior. And I saved Warrior for last because Warrior, which is why I wonder why they didn't micro adjust it, Warrior has a problem. If you heard about everything else we've said before, nothing has hit the 50% mark. There will never be a class that is more likely to have a card, any particular card in their deck, than less likely to have it when you're facing your opponent. And once you upset that assumption, you're in a whole different category of how you deal with a class. And at least in the November meta and the prior metas in Boomsday, Warrior was a very big differentiator here because Warpath has a 60% in deck rate. Execute, working with Warpath, has a 50% rate, a little bit below 50% rate, so also insanely high. And the other cards, including Tarlord, is at 39%, Super Collider's at 35%. Omega Assemblies at 33%. They're okay, but they're also annoyingly high. But what really screws you over is going to be Warpath, and you will see Warpath. This is the one exception to this entire long list of, oh, you probably play around too much stuff. Oh, don't play around it unless there's a lot of things that do the same thing. No. For Warpath, the number is so high, you play around Warpath specifically until you bait out the first Warpath.
Yep.
So don't extend. If you have an extra 2-drop that you could drop or not drop and you already secured the board, just hero power. If you, I don't know, have stuff on the board and you need to play something else, make it a high health creature or a creature with a death rattle that'll survive the Warpath. The Warpath is coming. You need that read. And so playing against Warrior, one of the number one skills in playing against the Warrior right now, and it's a crappy skill, it really is just, do you know when you have a read on Warpath and how good at you are baiting the Warpath? That's because you can't do anything until you bait out the Warpath or have a read that he has to top deck his Warpath. You're paralyzed until then. So you need to be able to do that as quickly as possible with as secure of a read as possible afterwards. And in the times when your opponent just either top decks the Warpath or ends up with 2 Warpaths in their hand, so you bait one out and then you get screwed by the other one later, you just lose. So, I know a lot of people don't mind Warrior being the best class in the meta, but the way that they are the best class is very problematic right now, I think.
Yeah, what I have noticed is because Warriors are so good right now and they have such good stuff, the way that I have played, especially with rogues and hunters, classes that can be quite aggressive, I don't think people have sort of maximized the way to play Warrior yet. It's kind of a new experience for people. So what I see a lot of players do, and you guys can take advantage of this as well. They feel comfortable, a little bit too comfortable, relying on Warpaths, right? They'll sit back, they'll armor up, and they'll be like, I got this. I got this, in terms of value. I have so much initiative. And you can see it from the beginning. And from the beginning, I just always assume every warrior has Warpath.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you've established it's correct to do that as well. What I will always do is in the beginning of the game, and this is why I like, I like having 3 drops and 4 drops that can actually kind of attack, right? So, for example, if you just have a 3 drop that is a basilisk, I'm just like, ooh, this isn't really good against the warrior, right? It dies to 2 warpaths and it can't really go face. I like my 3/4s, I like my 4/4s. I have these medium-sized stuff. And then essentially what I do is I get these medium-sized stuff out there. And then after they're able to super collider, going into turn 5, that's when I play the MTC like in the middle or something there, and then I make it awkward, right? Because Warpath, essentially what happens is it's
MTC being
flexible.
Microtech Controller. That is
Microtech
not
controller,
a
not
normal.
MCT.
Like, I get you're trying to make it
Yeah,
happen,
yeah.
but that is not a
No,
normal
no, 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 no. Well,
abbreviation.
well, okay. No, I'm saying that's when you play like that's when I play my small stuff. Like
Right.
I set up the medium stuff first, and then I play my small stuff. Right. What you want to do to punish warriors that play incorrectly, and if you face a warrior that plays correctly and has all the cards, you can just lose. Right. You
Mm-hmm.
just lose because they have the deck. But I've seen a lot of warriors play incorrectly, and then what happens is I put this pressure on, and I'm able to put them in a weird spot where they suddenly realize, crap, my super collider doesn't do enough, right? Especially on this turn, and maybe I can get enough value in 2 turns, but I'm dead by then. And my warpath doesn't do enough. Like I try to set it up so that I'm like, all right, going into his turn 6, I'm like, he can only kill like a couple of 1/1s. He can't kill everything else. And then I can swing to the face for like 8 more damage and then set up still, right? So you put them in this awkward position, and they could have like all the good cards in the world, but it's not enough for you to, on average, find lethal. And I think part of it is just Warriors not playing optimally right now.
Yeah.
They die, and I look at their cards. I'm like, I find it hard to believe like that was kind of your play, right? I like there was one run on Friday where this warrior he like kept on armoring, kept on just doing cute stuff, and on like turn 5 he put down what was it, like the tainted zealot, right? Like the 1/1 divine shield, spell power, and then like hero powered as well. I'm like, do you think I'm gonna ignore that? I'm like, I'm not gonna ignore that thing, and then I just like kind of slightly inefficiently traded into it, right?
Yep.
And then I went phase, and then he kind of just looked at his hand. He's like, I can't believe he traded there. He's like, why would he trade into that thing? He's like, I was going to get my super warpath next turn. So these are the kind of things in which I've seen it so many times from warriors that, it seems like people are getting easy wins with warrior by just kind of spamming warpath
Mm-hmm.
and kind of relying on other people to kind of play into it, which some people do. A lot of people do.
It's
Um,
like I don't know how many people do it now. I hope a lot of people, because we've been doing this for like God, like 3 years now. But it's like when you see a hunter that plays a trap and then like doesn't do anything, and it's
yeah.
turn 2. Like, don't hit into their face. Just like hang out, put more stuff on the board. They'll lose if they don't do the same, and you have initiative the entire way through. So you're just gonna win that game, like 95% of the time. But I can imagine, and I have seen, especially with Wandering Monster. Oh my god, with Wandering Monster. I remember when that card first came out, and we put it as like a crap rating, like I don't know, like a 80 or a 75 or something like really low. And people were like, no, this can't be right. Like I'm winning all my games with it. It's so good, and I'm like, maybe people are just that dumb, and they are, and right because it was new, and they're less dumb now, I'm sure. But still more dumb than we'd like people to be. And I'm sure with Warpath, like, has it been out for like 6 months at this point? Yeah, it has. But really, it takes longer than 6 months for people to catch on to this stuff. Like, it's sad, but it does. People think Warpath is unbeatable, just something you take. It's one card, what are you going to do about it? Or they just like play around it way too much. Like, they haven't found the optimal thing to do against Warpath. And the fact that Warriors all have Warpath is really just getting them a lot of wins at the lower. And when I say lower, I mean up to like probably like 5/2s, right? Like I think after that you kind of escape into the like people with ridiculous decks or who know what they're doing zone. But yeah, they need to nerf Warrior. Like they really do, because it's just gonna get worse and worse. And I don't know. I'm kind of sad they didn't micro adjust Warriors. Maybe it's coming. Maybe it's gonna come before the next expansion comes out. But it's gonna be a problem, and it's not like a fun problem. Like Merce was saying, right? We're only doing okay, or like people are doing well right now, but they're doing well right now because the Warriors they're facing are not playing well at all. They're playing like of all the other classes you face, they play the most inefficiently because they don't know what they're doing. And Warriors still already has the highest win rate.
Yeah.
Like once they figure out what they should be doing at a higher win rate, right? Once like the optimal way to play against all players for warrior matches up more with the optimal way to play warrior against good players, then we're gonna get screwed. Because right now, a lot of what we're doing is relying on these like bad warriors getting through, and even good warriors being like, "Well, I can get a lot of advantage doing this because, like, 80% of the time it works, and it's just that 20% of the time it doesn't work, and that 20% of the time is like 100% of the time for us. So we just get the advantage without the disadvantage. But once that gap closes, it's gonna be frustrating for everyone. Okay. Anyway, that's this meta right now. It's going to be here for at least 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, and we hope you enjoy it. It's actually a really good meta to be in. Like, this is the time to be playing the arena if you've been playing the arena at all in the last like 3 years. It's really it's nice. All right. Any question from the GOAT from today?
Oh no, I did not think of one.
No question from the GOAT. Hashtag unprepared merps.
I am not prepared.
Yes. Okay. Well, that total blank was brought to you by our patrons. Patreon.com/grinninggoat. I guess we'll announce this. I'll do a question from the GOAT.
Okay.
It's not really a question so much as an announcement. Which is what's happening with Rastakhan. So here's our schedule for the next month if you watch a stream or you don't watch a stream, but you tune in for the huge, ridiculous Lightforge like valuation stream. The valuation stream has been set for December 2nd. Our normal streams on November 30th, which is the Friday before that, and December 3rd, which is the Monday after that, are canceled. And we will have 8 straight days of streaming to kick off Rastakhan. Starting from December 4th and all the way through December 11th before we return to our regular schedule. So we got that for you guys coming up, and it's going to be exciting. We're going to bring in the holidays. I don't know when Feast of Winterveil is officially going to be like put into the Blizzard servers, but I'm really excited about that, as always. And yeah, thank you guys so much for your support. Our patrons are at patreon.com/grinninggoat. If you're thinking of supporting the Lightforge podcast or the stream, that's a good way to do it. We don't like do a lot of other kinds of donations outside of Twitch subs and the Patreon. So thank you guys very much. Let's close this out with Card Good Bad. This has been a long time coming. I think I told Ugbog like 3 months ago that I'm going to do this at some point. It's Beaker Lightning. It's a 35 right now. I'll say right now, there is a Lightforge Tierlist update coming that's going to... It's not going to come until the next expansion because it's working through a bunch of stuff. But one of the things that it's going to hit is going to make Beaker Lightning go up a little. But we're talking like 10 points. Maybe 20 points. It's still going to be bad. Beaker Lightning is a 0-mana shaman card. It deals 1 damage to all minions on the board. And then it overloads you for 2. So it's like a 2-mana delayed whirlwind. And we have it at a 35 right now.
Yeah.
It's bad. So I'm going to compare this right now to Whirlwind itself, which is 1 mana, and in Warrior, which is a totally different class. And Whirlwind is a 115. We have Whirlwind rated pretty damn high. So what's the difference? Is just 1 extra mana totally destroying Beaker Lightning?
Well, first of all, 1 mana extra on 1 mana is double. So yeah, it's kind of like, it's like, oh man, it's like saying, it's like, does 1 pound really matter? And you're like, dude, the thing itself is a pound. Like you're doubling the weight, right? But also you have to look at the class, right? The class, sort of what the class does, what it's strong against, and what it's weak against as well. And if you look at Whirlwind for Warrior, it's something that they want to do. It's something that they have cards that synergize with it in terms of, you can look at Frothing Berserker, you can look at Execute, etc., etc. And also in Shaman, right, you're making totems, you're probably going to be the one on the board. So hurting all of your stuff is going to, on average, hurt a lot more. Warriors tend to play off the board a ton more these days until sort of like the late mid game, in which they establish something and then they flip everything around and suddenly, you're down 4 cards and then they put down all of their stuff and then they go face. Shamans just fundamentally play a little bit differently. So all of these contribute to a huge score differential. It's huge. Also, let's go back to the very beginning. It costs twice as much.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really, really major point. And people are bringing up comparisons to Spirit Lash, which costs the same amount and does the same exact thing on the board, but Spirit Lash heals you for like 6-7 health.
Yeah,
Healing you for like 6-7 health is like a 1-mana card in and of itself.
healing you as a class that just wants to make it to the end game is a really good thing.
And doing it in a class that doesn't have other options to do that kind of stuff, whereas Shamans have Volcano, they have Lightning Storm, they have more taunts even, if you're looking at it that way. Like, it's a pretty big difference. What also gets brought up sometimes is, but Shamans can have a totem that is that makes it deal 2 damage to everything, which is a lot better, right? That's a Volcanic Potion. It's like, fine, but you're destroying that totem. The totem's a 1/4 roll, and to the extent that your totems usually function, it's not I hit the totem button then I do something. It's I have a board and so I can keep toteming. Because if you're toteming and you miss and you lose 2 damage of stuff, like 2 mana of stuff, and you need to clear your opponent's board, which is why you're using a double-sided board clear anyway, like, you're dying. Like, this is not like a option here. This is like a super, super fringe side benefit bailout of 25% chance. So that's that. Like, the algorithm considers that, actually. It's built in. Beaker Light is getting a number of points for that possibility, but it's correctly weighing that as not terribly important because of how the card is set up.
Yeah, this is one in which sometimes when I get the number from the algorithm, I'm like, no, anecdotally it just doesn't feel like that. Or sometimes I'm just like, there's sort of a disconnect with like what the algorithm spits out and what it feels like in game. And this one, for me, it's totally in line.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I drafted it once, and in that run, I'm just like, this is a terrible card. It is just such an insanely bad card. And I've tried it in like I tried it in sort of like a mid-rangey, more control-y shaman. Obviously, it's a never draft for the style I prefer to play.
It's a never draft for even a mid-range shaman. You have to play a control shaman for it to be draftable, and then it is draftable, right? Like,
it is draftable.
If you're control, even a 2-mana whirlwind is decent.
Yeah, but even then, for me, I just recognize, I'm like, when it's that kind of shaman, I'm like, sometimes this card is just a little bit too small,
Yep.
Right? And it's the problem that you have with, if you look at something like Shooting Star or Arcane Explosion, the reason that those work with Mage is just because the Mage can always edge it out with the hero power, right? Like, the hero power allows so much more sort of combinations with that it's a lot better. And those tend to be kind of more in line, once again, with what mages want/need to do in order to win. So yeah, with shamans, I'm just like, it's just a card that the algorithm says is really bad. And through my experience, I'm just like, yeah, I've never been beat by Beaker Lightning as well. Like, people play it and I'm just like, wow, that really sucked. And they play it, and it was like in their hand for a long time as well. And they just like in the end play it. So yeah, I don't see any sort of merit to increasing it at all.
Yep. That's Beaker Lightning. We penalize cards that are unplayable a good amount. Like, those cards get penalized because how do you win the game? You win the game by playing your cards. Not just any cards, the correct cards, by using your head, which is your skill. When you take a card and make it unplayable in your hand, you only had like 3-4 options. Maybe like 2-3 options, depending on what stage of the game you're in. You take one of those away, and then you have 1-2 options. Then what are you doing? Like, how are you going to be more than a 3-win player if you don't have the option to be a better player? You don't. You just end up getting whatever it is that Blizzard gives you, right? Like, and that's fine if you're a 3-win player, right? It doesn't hurt as much. But if you're normally able to use your decision making to edge out like a 3-to-1 ratio of win to losses, then not having an option, like reducing your option by 50% or even more, or even less than 50%, that's terrible. And to do that for multiple turns, like it's crashing your win rate. So these are also cards, any kind of situational cards, really. They're cards that get worse and worse and worse as you get better and better and better. A card like this, it has a little bit of redemption in control decks, where it's totally draftable, but it's got to be a control deck, and the tier list rates it for all decks. So it's not a draftable card for all decks. In a control decks, it's like consider it maybe, but you have to know you're going control first. Don't take it early, but just it's so bad for the other ones that it rates like a 0. All right, that's it for me. Are you also good?
Yeah, I'm good here.
All right. So next week we will still probably not have Rastakhan cards to talk about. There's actually one new Rastakhan card that was revealed, this Paladin card that gives you immunity. Yeah, we'll talk about it later. But next Sunday, I think, will be the last day before before Rastakhan cards start being released. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about Rastakhan previews and what we want to see in Rastakhan in that week. And so I think this is going to wrap up our discussion of the current meta, unless they change something again. So assuming Blizzard doesn't make any changes, I think this is the Lightforge that wraps up our discussions on the November meta. And starting next week, we're going to jump deep into speculation, review, and all that good stuff about Rastakhan. And culminating in December 2nd, we're going to start at 5 p.m. East Coast time, an hour earlier than the normal Lightforge, and we are going to go and do the valuation for every card. So that's the schedule for the rest of the month. Have a good day, night, whatever, everybody. And we'll see you here next week. Until then, this is Oddwicto.
This is Merp. See you guys.